I wonder, and I hope it's not a crude question, and it's one sort of stemming from genuine interest. Would you rather your child comes to you and says, I think I'm going to convert to Islam, or said, I don't think I believe in God anymore?
As a Jew, I'm fairly indifferent on the question, meaning that my priority is for my child to remain a Jew, and which direction they go from there is of much less interest to me than staying inside the religious tradition that I believe is correct.
Okay, maybe I should rephrase to say, suppose that half of the U.S. population immediately, right now, and half of let's say half of the Christian population. So it's not to do with
Right.
Judaism, and it's not to do with your own family. Half of the Christian population in the United States are immediately going to convert today to atheism if you press this button, or to Islam if you press this button. Which one would you press?
So I'm going to ask for more specificity
Sure.
in line with the conversation. So which form of Islam are we talking about, and which form of atheism are we talking about? Because they come in various strains. But meaning, like, if we're just starting from the premise of no God or Islamic God, that actually is not enough information. Because as I say, I'm not judging people
Yes.
based on their faith propositions nearly as much as I am based on their behavior, which I think they base on faith propositions.
Well,
So
let's say this is the only thing that changes. You press this button, half the Christian population become convinced that there is no real God of the universe. Everything else is random. Whatever you might, because what we're discussing here is essentially what are the implications of such a worldview?
Right.
What are the implications of atheism, which is just the disbelief in God, or the belief that there
do
is
people have
not one.
memories? Sorry, in this hypothetical, do people have memories or they don't have memories? Because this makes a difference.
They have memories.
Okay, fine. So then probably in the West, atheism, as opposed to a more radical form of Islam. That's why I was asking for specificity,
Well,
because they're more
the
moderate
button on the
forms.
right-hand side was going to be that they just become convinced that Muhammad is the final prophet of God.
Right,
That's it.
and again, I was going to ask for more specificity on that because I know many moderate Muslims who are not radical in the implication of their faith, as opposed to some who very much are quite radical in the implications of their faith. So, but let's, if you don't mind, I'm going to set up your hypothetical in a way that I think is more clarifying for me
Please.
anyway, and that is button on the right is radical Islam, like Taliban style Islam.
Okay.
And button on the left is don't believe in God.
Well, I mean, you can do that.
No, the reason I'm doing that is because that elucidates a difference that I think is being obscured by the simple sort of belief in God, not belief in God question, meaning that the cultural heritage of that's why I asked if people have memories or people don't have memories. If people have memories, then that looks very much like secular Europe right now, which does have
The cultural
in the
heritage of
bloodstream
Judeo-Christian
a lot of
values.
Judeo-Christian values in a way that
Yes.
would not be true if you were without memory. Right? Would I rather that a child found in a forest be raised in a moderate Muslim household or be raised in a secular communist household?
Or a secular atheist household, if I may say.
Again, from which tradition? Are we talking in the USSR or are we talking in Britain? Like, what are we talking
We're talking
about
about
here?
Britain.
Okay, so
Well, we were talking about the US, but let's say Britain.
In Britain, depends on the strain of Islam. If we're talking about like a liberal form of Islam, which do exist, then probably a liberal form of Islam. If we're talking about a fundamentalist form of Islam, then probably a secular strain of Britain.
Fine. The second point was to say, I mean, you mentioned not wanting to just to take Scripture at face value, and I understand the difficulty of taking Scripture essentially out of context and trying to take a literal approach where a literal approach isn't supposed to be taken. I mean, people forget that the Bible is a collection of books rather than a book with lots of different
With an oral
genres inside
tradition
it.
and all the rest, yes.
I saw a video once of somebody trying to use the Bible to disprove the divinity of Jesus by quoting the book of Job, saying, God is not a man that I might question him. God is not a man, you see, and I thought, not only is this in the mouth of Job, but also, that's the kind of thing that we want to avoid. But it does seem to me that there are some things within religious scripture that do need to be taken seriously and do need to be taken essentially at face value. That is, some of the very specific legalistic commandments of the Old Testament, for example, or of the Hebrew Bible, I should say. These are not, when people list these and say that these are potentially morally problematic and may have done something towards hindering, for example, like I mentioned earlier, the abolition of slavery in the United States. Of course, there was a great deal of religious influence on both sides, which is something that I've already mentioned. But don't you think that this problem could have been solved a lot more easily if there had been a stronger religious tradition of opposition to the ownership of other human beings? Why can't that have been the case?
Okay,
because
so
Scripture quite explicitly condones it.
Right,
And in fact gives you the details of how to do
Yes,
it.
so-
that's something that couldn't have been done, in other words,
This
because
is fun
you've
for me.
taken
Now I get
this,
to tell me to gloss. So
this
here's
moral
the-
principle that's placed outside of meaningful debate.
Right.
Before we move on, can I ask, where are we getting these buttons from? Are they from Amazon? You know, you press one and everyone's an atheist.
There's this wonderful thing
Are these available on the market?
That I think you both need to use in this conversation, which is imagination.
Oh, right.
So let's. As far as why didn't the Bible prescribe the perfect world as I would see it, or as you might see it, and the answer is because two reasons. One, as stated right up top, I'm not God. I assume he has different logic than I do. Mm-hmm. Two, the Bible is in an inherently problematic position in the sense that, on the one hand, it's trying to divulge important truths for all time. At the same time, it's talking to a people of a particular time.
Yes.
And this is a well-worn tradition inside Judaism. So to take the slavery example, there is no mandate to hold slaves in the Bible. Right? There are lots of mandates in the Bible. Many, many mandates. There's 613 of them according to my religion, right? That's why I do all these weird things that I do. But one of those mandates is not to hold slaves. Right? And so the idea of there was a society that existed at the time of the Bible in which slaveholding was not only ubiquitous, it was universal, and which was true for virtually all of human history.
That's right.
And could be justified not just in terms of religious scripture, but in terms of Aristotelian thought. Right? I mean, the great philosophers we like to cite sometimes in the secular tradition are big fans of slavery, and that's true virtually up until the 18th century.
Yes.
So the idea would be, is this verse attempting to woo people away from a tradition of slavery or to humanize the slaves? Or is it attempting to reinforce that by making it harsher and more difficult? And that's why actually one of the things I enjoy doing in terms of how I study the Bible, for example, is I like to look at contemporaneous religious texts of the time. So
yes.
I like to study the Bible alongside, for example, Hammurabi's Code. And it's really interesting to notice the differences and where the Bible is liberalizing Hammurabi's Code, for example.
Absolutely.
And so the idea that a divine revelation has to be given to human beings who are capable of following that in the time. Again, that's part of the difficulty of I think rebutting religion in a certain sense, because again, it seems wiggly, but it really isn't, in the sense that if you believe, as I do, in a God who spoke to human beings in some form or fashion and has to speak to them on a level that they can understand, in ways they can understand, then that immediately is going to discount the ability to do a lot of very radical things that would have appeared radical in 1200 BC, but now appear to be commonplace for us.
Yes, I understand this argument, and I've heard it many times. I must say that it seems strange to me that God does seem willing to completely and utterly condemn a bunch of other practices, including, by the way, imaginary crimes like witchcraft, just done away with entirely. And even if it is the case that God, for some reason, couldn't even hint at the idea that maybe eventually we should be moving towards the abolition of the idea of owning human beings as private property, he just has to condone it.
But yes.
I still think it's the case that he would not permit a flat immorality, and I think you would agree with that too. And so when I open the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, and when I look at the texts saying that if you lay siege to a city, you can kill, if the Lord delivers it into your hand, you can kill the men and the women, you can kill the men and keep the women and the children and the livestock as plunder, as Deuteronomy says. And in the very next the very next chapter says that, if you see a good-looking woman, and I'm not interjecting that. If somebody finds an attractive woman,
yes, Ifatoar is the actual Hebrew. Yeah.
Then they can take them for themselves, and if they want them as their wives, and they take them home, they shave their head, they cut off their fingernails, they give them 30 days to mourn their old husband, who you may very well have just killed, and then you can take them as your wife. When Numbers 31 has Moses instruct the slaughter of the Midianites, saying, "Kill all the men," and this time the women get killed too, but not the women who haven't slept with a man. And why might that be? And it says that, keep them for yourselves. And I hear all the time that this is some kind of liberalizing process. Maybe it's because, these people wouldn't survive on their own. It's some kind of protective measure to make sure that you're looking after them. If that's the case, then why does it only apply to the virgins? That seems a little bit suspect to me. It's sort of Scripture is littered with these kinds of
Well, again, so to go back to the sort of oral tradition nature,
and I don't think God would permit a proactive immorality, even if he can't, for some reason, abolish the practice altogether, if you see what I'm saying.
No, that last point I don't see. So when you say even if he can't abolish the practice altogether,
which already I think he would be able to do.
Right, so the question is whether he can or whether he can't. If he can't abolish the practice, then the idea of wooing people away from a particular type of sin through a gradualistic process is known throughout societies across human history. I mean, the gradualistic processes are the way that most things get done across human history. And by the way, the universal practice, unfortunately, up till today in many places in the world, is in fact the extreme version of what you're talking about. Raise everything, kill everyone. Right? That sort of stuff, unfortunately, does take place, even on planet Earth, even in the year 2023. And so the idea of a culture arising from the Bible that not only abolished slavery on its own shores, but then abolished slavery literally everywhere else, which is what Great Britain did. That, again, to separate that off from a tradition that also says that every human being is made in the image of God, right, which is the verse from Genesis, or that you have to treat the stranger well, right, which is repeated more than any injunction in the Bible, right? There are these traditions that are at war with each other inside the Bible, which is why there is this hotly fought kind of argument inside biblical circles about all of this stuff, which again is one of the reasons why I said right up top that when it gets to, I can't just open the Bible and interpret the text as I would see fit.